So folks, my name is Tyler Colburn. I am the professional development consultant here at the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. We are joined by Shila, LeBlanc, who's going to be leading us through a session on embodying relational strategies as social workers. I'm going to get us started, and you'll hear me talk for about 5 to 10 minutes here, and I'm going to pass it over to Shila. But first things, I do want to, hopefully you'll join me in this land acknowledgement, but I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Chipuktuk, actually, not from Punamukutijik. I do live in Punamukutijik, colonially known as Dartmouth, but I'm here in the HRM, the Halifax side, and we are located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. And what I'm hoping folks will do is join me in the chat with the land acknowledgement and acknowledge the land that you are on. I'm going to post some prompts in here. In the chat, so look for that. And there's a link there to placenames.mapdev.ca. So if you're in the area colonially known as Nova Scotia, you can look up where you live and reside or work, wherever you're joining this call from, and name the land that you're on. But also check in, how are you arriving, and anything that you're curious about today. It's important as we acknowledge the land, not just use words and make a statement like I just did, but also connect into the fact that we are also part of nature. We are expressions of this land. And so leaning into decolonial theory here a little bit, and this quote at the bottom from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, and it says, understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around. So as we think about settler colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, some of these dominant forces that we experience in the day-to-day, they often position humans as people who are here to dominate land. And so I often think that it's helpful to maybe center or consider how we are expressions of nature as ways of not just acknowledging the land, but broadening their horizons around decolonial theory. Let us take a moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Thinking of land defenders and water protectors engaged in resistance and resurgence here in Mi'kma'ki, across Turtle Island, and around the world. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. I want to point people to a session that we have on July 2nd, I believe, around Indigenous ethics with Veronica Bernard that'll be touching on this. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. And thinking about the ongoing violence that is happening around the world, if you're paying attention to any of the news this weekend, there's many examples of how that presents itself right now. And let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere inside and out. So just hopeful that this session today around relational strategies helps us be in right relationship with this land and one another. And a reminder that we are also all treaty people. And so if you are in Mi'kma'ki, which I assume most of you are, in this particular area, we are guided by the peace and friendship treaties. And so how is our roles as social workers entangled into our responsibilities if you are a settler like myself? And how can we do a better job as treaty partners? I also, separate and distinct from a land acknowledgement, I do want to talk about our commitment to reparations here at the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers for people of African descent. And it's important to call to mind that the forces of settler colonialism and the forces that led to the enslavement and displacement of people of African descent are parallel tracks that often weave and cross each other. And for us, as we commit to reparations, there's sort of 5 areas for the college: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and making sure that it never happens again. So guarantees of non-repetition. If you're curious about our commitment to reparations, you can read this link here on our website, which I'll share in the chat. So the history of people of African descent in Nova Scotia is marked by resilience, contribution, and profound influence on the province's social fabric. So we're thinking of the Black Loyalists, the Maroons, South American Black refugees, and understanding that the legacies of these communities have indelibly shaped Nova Scotia's cultural landscape. So we have distinct, I believe it's 52 communities across Nova Scotia that are identified as African Nova Scotian. And when we're thinking about this concept of relational strategies, we're really grounding ourselves in decolonial practice and insights and theories and approaches that are central to Afrocentric perspectives and Indigenous perspectives. So I'm going to read this quote and I'll shortly pass it over to Shila, but this is from an Ubuntu-centered practice on, I think this is Threads. It's a account I follow. And they say, unless you're practicing with cultural humility, employing anti-oppressive practices, and decolonizing your approaches in mental health professional, like social workers or healthcare providers, you're likely perpetuating anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism. The systems we work within inherently uphold white supremacy, and at their core, they are anti-Black and anti-Indigenous. Therefore, cultural humility isn't an optional cultural competency skill, it's an ethical and civic responsibility. Just really want to grounding ourselves in a lens around social justice and equity and decolonization, this work that we're going to do together today. Reminder as well, this is formal professional development. I'll share the link to this presentation, but as you're tracking your PD activities, this would be considered formal professional development. It's also guided by our code of ethics. So value 4, valuing human relationships, value 5, preserving integrity in professional practice, and value 7, providing competent professional services are all touched upon in this session today. And of course, our objectives as well, which you can find in this presentation, but we're hoping you develop or shift some knowledge, values, and skills in our work together today around relational strategies. And that is it. So I'll stop sharing and I'll put this in the chat and I'm going to pass it over to Shila, who's going to lead us through the content for the rest of the session.
Thank you. So Tyler, I'll need to be able to share. I should have checked that before we began. It's super nice. Yeah, every time how it goes. Really appreciating being here in community with folks. I'm not a social worker, but I definitely have been working frontline for ages and ages in different ways. So I feel like we have a lot in common in terms of the work that we're doing day to day. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, thanks, Tyler. So I'll be working from a slide deck, which I'll circulate to folks after we're done. I'm here throughout the presentation. I invite you to use the chat. Tyler's also here monitoring, so if you have any questions or comments, and also big thanks to folks who did send some really thoughtful questions about things you wanted to learn today. I could talk about this for hours and hours and days and weeks and months, honestly. So I'm going to do my very best to distill the kind of core things in an hour. It's a big task, but we'll do what we can with the time that we have. And then you know where to find me. So that's, I think, a great thing. If you do ever want to use some of the content again, please check in. This is my livelihood. So as always, share the teachings, but if you do want to reuse my slides, check in with me about that, please. So just a quick introduction, I'd like us to get into what we're here for today, but just to orient you a little bit to who I am. I'm a queer settler. I live right in Chibouktug. I've been living on Gottingen Street for almost a whole decade now. I come from a lineage of doing restorative justice within the Department of Justice, so doing that victim offender mediation work. And that was really for me what sparked my passion and obsession with relational restorative practice. And so I did that for multiple years. I was then hired on at the Human Rights Commission. And at the time, I thought it was my dream job, that I'd really kind of made it. My salary quite literally doubled overnight. In my restorative justice work, I was very much underpaid, and that was a real challenge for me personally. But as it goes, you know, the government process right now that is used when it comes to human rights investigations felt really harmful to me. And it was a very, very difficult period of my work because what I noticed was that I was tasked with addressing really serious types of harm with a toolkit that was deeply litigious. And this is very counter to my instincts and to what I know about conflict work. So in COVID, I actually got laid off. I went back to business ed and then opened Restorative Approach. So we're coming up to almost 4 years now that I've been doing this kind of formally. I'd been doing restorative work for many years before I kind of branched out. So I do this work full time. The majority of my work is about conflict resolution, but there's also a lot of work in terms of policy development and also education. I really, really love, and this is an example of this, when groups are seeking to understand more before things go wrong, when folks are interested in learning more just because it's important. So that kind of proactive education I really love, and also the blanket exercise. So some of you may have participated in this exercise. It's a really beautiful, heartfelt way to understand reconciliation and treaty relationships today. So some of my interests, again, I suspect in the social work world that we're probably really aligned in terms of the things that we're thinking about, the things we're working on. And I'm really thankful to love the work that I do. So just some quick things about community agreements. I'm sure that this kind of goes without saying in this room, but just to articulate it, be there for each other, listen well, share the space. There will be chances for folks to participate, lean into discomfort, be curious, and practice non-closure. I love this one. This is a very deep part of relational strategy, which is this idea that we can have multiple things in conflict, and this can be a state of peace. We're not always going to reconcile or heal, and maybe it's not now, and maybe it's not in our lifetime or generation, and that's okay. So can we increase our capacity to hold that tension without lashing out or reacting in a challenging way? Welcome and respect differences and diversity, share the teachings, protect the story, one voice, you can pass, step out if you need to. I know it's lunch hour, so I hope you're all snacking away and doing what you got to do. Allow for silence, own your intention and impact, and then just be mindful in terms of distractions. And then if you need any support, as I said, feel free to message me in the chat. Both Tyler and I are here. So what we're here to talk about today is restorative relational theory, restorative practice, restorative approaches, lots of different language about this. I think the most important thing to take away today is to understand that restorative work is an Indigenous way of knowing. It's a lens, it's a how, it's an orientation to our lives. I think what's really interesting looking at the kind of recent decades when it comes to restorative relational work, it's become very popular. There's a lot of sudden interest and intrigue about the field. But I think what's kind of alarming is that a lot of settler spaces have been adopting these ways of working, of knowing, without any acknowledgement, any appreciation for the fact that this is Indigenous. So to put that in perspective, when I was a caseworker, I was well into a full year of doing this work. I'd been by that point sitting in circles every day, and it was not made clear to me that this is Indigenous. And it was only through my own research that that became clear to me. So that's alarming to think through. And there was, especially, in the 80s, a lot of kind of youth justice initiatives where certain white men in the States were taking credit for kind of developing restorative justice, which is outrageous. So this has always existed. It's been a way of being for time immemorial, and it's basically an orientation toward our relations, our interconnections, and it's really that simple. So some of the things that we go through today might feel kind of basic or obvious, maybe even familiar to you, and that's because there's nothing fancy here. Everything we're talking about today is deeply a part of who we are as a species. And so, especially when we're looking at restorative systems and processes that exist in the justice system, in the education system, it's so important to understand that a lot of those programs and processes were developed with support from or even entirely by Indigenous folks, and often as a direct response to the over-incarceration of Indigenous people in our carceral system today. So last time I checked, in the federal system, there's around 33% of folks who are incarcerated, who are in cells and cages, are Indigenous right now. And that community is a margin of our general national population. So I think it's like 2 or 3% right now. So these systemic injustices are continuing to this day. So just to be really crystal, as I kind of walk us through the content, this is by no means some special thing that I've developed whatsoever. As a white person, as a settler doing this work, I take great care to make sure that I'm mindful and careful and respectful of these teachings, and have developed relations with the Mi'kmaq community here to make sure that the way that I'm doing things is in a good way, because I'm very mindful of this piece. And again, I think as it grows, it's very exciting, but if we're not adequately acknowledging or appreciating this, I think we are being really appropriative and harmful. So just to be crystal clear on that one. So in terms of language, the term restorative itself is pretty straightforward: ability to restore health, strength, or a feeling of well-being. So when we're talking about relational, restorative, whatever, we're just talking about relationships in the most foundational sense. And we're asking a set of very basic, again, familiar kind of foundational questions. What's our relationship to ourselves? And I find this self relationship is wildly lacking, especially in the helping professions. I think it's so critical as we try and offer care to the world, that we ourselves are coming in a good way within ourselves. So am I showing up in a state of ease? Am I really exhausted? Am I burnt out? Am I struggling with mental health or self-loathing or whatever might be going on? However, our internal relationship is, this impacts everything else, everywhere that we go. So starting there as a foundational practice is really important. And then we're asking, how do I feel about those around me? Do I feel like we're friends? Are we enemies? Are we acquaintances? Are we in a period of building trust? Are we comrades? Are we accomplices in the work? And then that broader question, so do I feel like I belong? Are there parts of myself that I need to hide or tone down or limit in some way in order for me to be accepted in the community? All of these questions are signs of health or lack thereof. And so when we're talking about relational practice, I think the other thing that's so important to know is anything that we do at any time can be relational, can be restorative. So, I can go to my barista and have a really restorative interaction with them. Um, I can go to work and set up a program and process that is relational. So, in micro and macro ways, anything we do can be oriented toward interconnections, toward the humans in the room. And it's really such a powerful opportunity for us to connect in so many levels. So it's not just restorative justice in the court system whatsoever. There's a lot of different ways that this can look in very small and very significant ways. So today we're going to be talking about restorative practices, principles, processes, responses. Again, I'm not really caught up in the language. I think there's a lot of ways we can articulate this. But restorative justice tends to be a little bit more about someone who was harmed, someone who caused harm, working through that relationship. Again, there's a lot of other very interconnected concepts, transformative justice being one of them. So today we're just going to look at relational strategy in the broad sense. So I wanted to take a bit of time to talk through the qualities. What are the ways that it is felt or experienced? One thing that I'm thinking about more and more in my practice, it's a troubling thought, but an important one, is how some of us might not have had any exposure to or a felt sense of relational strategy at this point in our lives. So how can we be mindful of that for the folks who haven't experienced connected relationships? Are we able to offer some touch points of what that can be? So the most foundational piece, no surprise, connection is medicine. We are interconnected. That's it. We know about COVID, how much we suffered when we were disconnected. This is a deeply foundational, undeniable truth. And I think in late stage capitalism, we're really trying to automate and avoid this reality, when in fact, our connections are everything we should orient toward, not away. And a really other foundational, deeply important view here is that conflict is natural. Natural is the key word. It is unavoidable. It is inherent. It is inevitable. And in our current culture and time, we often view conflict as something bad or wrong. Oh no, we're in conflict. It's a negative situation. And to be crystal clear, conflict is super uncomfortable. It can really suck to be in conflict. I'm a conflict facilitator. I suffer immensely when I'm in conflict. I'm no more skillful than anyone else in my personal realm because it's so painful, right? When we're in conflict, but it's part of the journey. And when you are really trying to take a lens of equity, inclusion, diversity, accessibility, etc., these points of difference among us, I think makes it so clear that we will have conflict because there's so much difference to navigate. And so we expect conflict. And so how we handle it is really the question, not if we have it or we don't. We will have it. So what will we do about that? And it can be generative. So often nowadays, conflict is a source of kind of endless disconnection, polarization, radicalization. But when we are skillful about conflict, it can be a source of generativity, even if it's hard and painful, even if it asks a lot of us and is a high labor for us in the moment. It can be that opportunity for growth and connection. So we know that conflict will happen. The other part of that is acknowledging that we will make mistakes. And we're unfortunately in this very toxic kind of perfectionist culture now. People can get kind of sliced out of community for one wrong move. This is not sustainable or realistic. It's not reasonable. We will make mistakes. So part of this lens is recognizing that those moments of friction and rub are coming, and that's normal. And I think you can also make the argument that if you're staying in a very safe bubble, you might not ruffle any feathers, but you might also be really missing out on opportunities to take risks, expand your awareness, deepen your relationships. So in some ways, hitting those edges, I think, is a healthy sign of being in the world and navigating relations with other people who might not be like us. So we expect conflict. We know that we're all going to mess up. I've made a million mistakes this year already. And so, how can we incentivize responsibility, accountability? This is the part of restorative world that I think about probably the most, because in 2025, a lot of our processes really discourage honesty. They really discourage ownership and accountability over these difficult moments, especially when we think about kind of standard investigative responses, any kind of institutional complaint or grievance process. It's very adversarial right from the get-go. And there's a lot of missed opportunities in those early moments of conflict to open that space. And especially, I'm thinking a lot about processes. How can people say, it was me, I messed up, I'm sorry, I'm wrong, without automatic punishment? Because generally these days, admission of guilt or taking responsibility is a liability, right? And this is so harmful. Honesty and being responsible for harm is an incredible sign of courage and health. So when I write policy, I'm always thinking about offering that window. And to be crystal clear on this piece, it's not that this will always be the right fit, but how can we do our very best to start from that place, to open that portal and say, hey, can we give you this chance to rise? We really want to sort this out. So not everyone will opt in, but can we try? Can we begin there? And if we resolve conflict, it builds trust. It just does. If you think about your close relationships, family, friends, community partners, whatever, if you go through moments of fire and hardship and pain and you manage to get through it together, your relationship is sturdier than it was before. So again, I think true intimacy demands conflict. It's really easy to stay surface, but it's really when we get into that kind of deeper content that we can run into those moments of disconnection. And so, it's interesting. I work in a lot of different places. Right now, my main clients are unions, for example, and nonprofits. But I've also been in private sector and post-secondary. And it's interesting because our kind of position in the work is we don't really need to know. Like we obviously do our work to understand each culture, climate, context, of course. But at the end of the day, whatever work you're doing, if your relationships are in conflict, your work is suffering. And that's it. It's really that simple. So we don't need to be experts in the places that we're coming into. We're sincerely just assessing. Do folks feel safe here? Do they have good communication? Are they able to work together effectively? What's going on? If everybody's in conflict and disconnected and feeling maybe fear, feeling, hostility or aggression, your work is suffering. Whatever service you're providing, whatever support you're trying to offer is suffering. So we just really take a very foundational look at the state of relationships, the very basic quality of it. And then for us, we're in this very lucky, fortunate place. And I know that for many folks in the call today, it's not your reality. For us, we only work with people. So if folks aren't interested in doing a relational process in response to conflict, that's okay. We're not ever going to mandate or demand that folks come along. So for you, I'm guessing you probably have many elements of your work that have requirements where you must do 2 or do 4. And that's challenging, but that's also, I think, the reality of our current systems. So thinking about those pieces, there's 2 other important teachings that I think are really, really important to highlight when it comes to restorative work. The first one is ripples of harm and healing. you might have heard of this concept. It's something I reflect on probably like every day. There's an idea here that when there's a moment of harm, and harm is a very broad spectrum in restorative work, so it can be very minor, but still harmful, or very serious. So harm is a very broad spectrum. The idea, the teaching, is that one act of harm will always have unintended consequences. It's a series of dominoes that will happen. And the challenge in our interconnected world is that we can never know how that will ripple out. We can't fully anticipate the consequences. So, a youth smashes someone's car window, that person is late for work, but it was their third strike, so they lose their job. Is the youth responsible for them getting fired that day? No. Was that part of the ripples of harm from that instance? Absolutely. So, and then the Me Too movement would be the most dramatic example where there's like a tsunami, right? So on the other side, though, we want to be thinking of ripples of healing. And I feel like ripples of healing don't get enough space or time. And I'm very curious about ripples of healing because they are often more subtle or maybe not as obvious as ripples of harm. Again, we'll talk about it shortly about our physiology when it comes to conflict. But healing has its own beautiful ripple. So if I do the labor to sort out a point of tension at work, I'm showing up more open, more willing to communicate and engage. I might also go home and have better relations with my partners, family, whoever's there, community, because I'm feeling a little bit later, a little bit better from that work. So when we heal things, it often has these very powerful impacts, and we might not even recognize why, but it's always felt when folks are in that process of healing. So I think about those things, and then really tied up into that very deeply connected is intention versus impact, which I'm guessing you've heard of in your work. And the intention impact gap is where I spend most of my work. I do a lot of like coaching conversations and deep exploration with folks who might not be ready to accept accountability, responsibility. We want to try and gently and compassionately bring them into that place of ownership and understanding. It's so painful when we cause harm, and it's actually so rare that people intend to cause harm. I've been doing this for years. I can count on one hand to this day, one hand, the number of people I've worked with who are being malicious in bad faith. It's not common, actually. People are doing their best, and a lot of things happen and things go in different directions. And then suddenly we find ourselves in conflict. It's how she goes. So, can we be really aware that whatever our intention might have been, our intention matters? It does count. We assess that, it's part of the equation. But whatever the case may be, the impact is there, and we need to care for that in some way. And this intention impact gap, I think, is really a very core part of conflict, especially in the workplace, and also very much part of the disconnected adversarial processes, because a lot of processes right now are like, if you have evidence, we'll do something, and if you don't, it didn't happen, or we're not attuned to the harm. And that's just so wrong. So we really want to hold the impact no matter the case. So I'm just wondering, as we're talking about ripples of harm and healing and some of these concepts, what's coming to mind? And have you seen this manifesting in your work, in social work at all? So if you want to, I'm not sure if folks can unmute. Tyler, I'm not sure if they can like chat. Is it just the chat? So whatever the case may be, I invite you to, if you want to offer a reflection in the chat about this. Is there anything coming to mind about this? So we'll see if anyone is maybe typing something about that. It's interesting, as conflict facilitators, we're often, hearing different things and in community, and we'll often look at each other and just say, oh, ripples of harm. Or we might say, oh, ripples of healing. If you're really looking for this, it's kind of everywhere, actually. So I'm not seeing any thoughts right now. I'll just carry on. But if you want to send a reflection to the group, we'll certainly take some time to read it at the end or throughout. So just some other thoughts about like why, because this all sounds really nice, but why does it really matter? The first thing is that it's 2025. It's a wild time to be alive. And within capitalism, white supremacy, these old tools do not shift the systems. We have so much evidence to show that this is the case. And so there's this growing frustration and data that adversarial litigious processes are ineffective and often harmful. They're often very wasteful. I'm generally trying to pitch to organizations, can you hire me first before you bring in a lawyer? Can we try before we go through a legal kind of high conflict process? And I think the other thing to really keep in mind is sometimes when I am educating about this, folks really view it as like soft skills and formal skills. And there's certainly that element where we're inviting people to consider their demeanor, the way in which they show up, and how they communicate. But the truth of the matter is, it's much more than just a soft skill. If you can build strategic relations across sectors, this is how you actually do shift systems. When you think about systems as people, it really helps us realize we do have ways that we can be effective and change things. In the gender-based violence movement, which is something I'm very closely connected to in my work, there have been in Nova Scotia in the last year some pretty dramatic shifts. Government coming to a gender-based violence summit recently, for example, that had never occurred. And they were in the room listening to frontline providers and learning things. That only happened through relationships and through very skillful organizers who carefully, painstakingly, over months and months and months, fostered and worked to build trust and invite people to be, comfortable enough to attend. That was a systems shift based on relational strategy. So yes, it is soft, but it's so important and can actually have these very macro impacts. And all change work requires sturdy relationships. So if there's anything I'm feeling a lot of emotion about, I think, is the state of organizing right now, where our change movements are really challenged by points of difference. And I think that's kind of across the community right now. So how can we have that kind of sturdy, true trust? That's the only place where we can really take risks and push and take action. And so one-to-one work is, as I'm kind of saying, both micro and macro powerful. It does have our kind of immediate impacts, but it can also, as I said, shape systems and shape the way that programs and processes unfold. And I know you know this, where when you have key players in the right positions, when you have folks who are really good at organizing, good at getting people in the room, good at these skills, things go better. They just simply do. And so the invitation is really to just practice and keep cultivating this for our entire life. And the invitation is really to get better and better at holding difference, because difference is where we have conflict. And how can we stay grounded and regulated in our work? And as I've been kind of speaking to, the messier human way is the only way. And I think in this kind of ultra capitalist, hyper productive world, there's a denial of our humanity and an attempt to kind of roboticize us to be automative machines in our work. It's just not true. It's not realistic. So we really want to, again, return to some foundational truths of who we are. We're humans. It's messy. We're going to talk about the physiology of conflict in a minute here. And the other thing is, relational work takes more time up front, but it always saves time later. It always saves time. And I'm always trying to remind leaders of this. It's just the truth of the matter. You want to rush something and get it through now, but then you might have a lot of problems when it's out. What if you take an extra week? What if you take an extra month? Hold a few more important conversations and then do the thing you're going to do. Can you gather more information? Can you just take another minute to share a little bit more information before you end the meeting? So it does take time, but it is ultimately way more effective, way more efficient. Some of you are probably familiar with Adrienne Maree Brown. I'm obsessed with her. She's really credited for embodiment strategy and pleasure activism, emergent strategy, sorry. Yeah. And I love this quote: humans don't get anywhere other than being human. And the wisdom is not to get beyond it, but to accept and find a way to dance with it, to find the rhythm. So this is very much my practice. We have to acknowledge the messiness of who we are and find ways to get skillful with that. And that's the only option that we have. There's no rising above or through. This is who we are. Can we be there for that? So I'll just take a look in the chat and see if anything is coming up. Oh, so there's some great thoughts. Someone said, I have very recently been having lots of conversations about impact and tension. Love to hear. It's been a helpful concept to bring into situations where there has been conflict between team members. Such great news to hear and so important to use that language. I appreciate that comment. In my work with child welfare, this is another comment, I often made the effort to engage with grandparents and extended family. Yeah, beautiful. Over time, these ripples of healing helped immensely in future engagements with other family members and even neighbors. Yeah, Carol, thank you for sharing that. That's exactly the path that I'm suggesting here. Taking that extra time. And, it probably was additional labor, but then to your point, it really supported some of the things ahead. So thank you for that. And then another comment is saying, I appreciate how this idea envisions interconnectedness, that how we live, what we do, including our discourse, have consequences, not just for others, but also ourselves. Yeah, Jody, exactly. You could give the presentation, basically. That's the idea. And I really appreciate this idea of consequence. The Indigenous view is that we have obligations, that we are born into a state of obligation to others. And I really appreciate that viewpoint. We are a collective. No one can operate as an atom. So how can we appreciate that and try and work and live in a way that is honoring that truth? So thank you so much for those comments. And thanks, Tyler, for pointing to Adrienne Marie Brown, who is the coolest. We have to work from where others are, coworkers included, with our clients. Yes, and we'll touch on that as well. So time is flying. I'm going to keep moving. The other thing I want to just speak to is conflict in the body. And I feel so strongly that this is the greatest piece lacking right now when it comes to conflict management and conflict work. I could write a book on this piece. These days, there's a lot of fancy modalities, strategies, ideas about conflict that do not hold our bodies in the equation. And conflict lives in the body. It is a physiological, bodily, sensory experience that we go through. And until we can hold that reality, we will never resolve our conflict fully. So one of the things is that big or small harm erodes our community. And I think it's true, again, ripples of harm, ripples of healing. Even just like a tense, maybe gossipy conversation, just one little convo can impact the whole. Maybe someone hears it or sees it, talks to someone else about it, and suddenly you might be having some conflict brewing. So even small things do add up. And I'm sure for many of you, you have learned about trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practice. If you've not yet had any exposure to this kind of training, I really encourage you to do so. And basically, these are our innate or kind of conditioned evolutionary ways that our physiology responds to conflict. And there's a lot of really, really great information and strategies that we can learn with trauma-informed practice. It's something that we are very, very dedicated to in our practice. We have to be in terms of doing conflict work. And so the idea is that when we get into some of these modes, we're more or less offline. Our reptilian brain is kind of what takes over. And this is what's so interesting with conflict is that, people generally don't conduct themselves in moments of conflict how they wish they would have. I hear it every day in my work, it just kind of happened and here we are. And so when we are in a state of trauma, if we're experiencing fight, flight, freeze, or appease, also known as fawn or people pleasing, this can really escalate the conflict. And so I notice a lot of times people are attempting to resolve conflict when the systems, the physiological states are not prepared for it. We need to account for our bodies and our systems when we're dealing with conflict. So if you're noticing any of these things, it's not the time right now to try and dig into conflict work because people are not regulated, they're not grounded. And so all of our reactions are valid and normal. It's what we do about them that matters most. This is really the teaching. So I'm going to read a short little passage. I don't know. I think I stopped my share for a second. I'm just going to invite you to imagine this scenario. So I'm just going to read you a little story and you can picture it in your mind. So imagine that you're a cave person out innocently picking berries when suddenly you come nose to nose with a saber-toothed tiger. While you were simply gathering, the tiger was actually hunting, and the sight of you makes his mouth water. At the sight of the tiger, your hypothalamus sends a message to your adrenal glands, and within microseconds, you can run faster, hit harder, see better, hear more acutely, think faster, and jump higher than you could only an instant before. Your heart is actually pumping at 2 to 3 times its normal speed, sending nutrient-rich blood to the major muscles in your arms and legs. These tiny blood vessels under the surface of your skin close down, which consequently sends your blood pressure soaring so you can sustain a surface wound and not bleed to death. Even your eyes dilate so you can see better. All functions of your body not needed for the struggle about to commence are shut down. Digestion stops, so does sexual function, and even your immune system is temporarily turned off. Your suddenly supercharged body is designed to help you level the odds between you and your attacker. Consequently, you narrowly escape death by leaping higher and faster than you ever could before. With the danger now over you, you find you find a safe place to lie down and rest your exhausted body. Now, flash forward to the present day. Despite the huge amount of technological change in the 25,000 years, you are walking around with essentially the same set of internal body parts as that of the cave person. Imagine that at this very moment, you're in the break room at work, hunting for coffee and gathering donuts. Your boss is out hunting too, but guess what? He's hunting for you. As you gulp down your third cup of coffee, you hear your boss say those dreaded words. Could I see you for a moment in my office, please? At the sight of the tiger, your boss, your hypothalamus sends a message to your adrenal glands, and within seconds, your body summons all the same powers that your Stone Age ancestor needed to fight a saber-toothed tiger. You can almost feel your blood pressure soar as you take the long walk down the hallway. You remember a rumor that there might be upcoming layoffs. Your mind is racing, your heart is pumping, your blood pressure is soaring, your mouth is dry, your hands are cold and clammy, your forehead's sweaty. You might even need to use the washroom. As you imagine your boss firing you, your cave person inside you wants to come out. Maybe you'd like to run and hide or punch your boss in the nose, but you can't do either because it's the modern era. As your boss ushers you into the office and closes the door, you're experiencing a full-blown episode of the fight or flight response. But since you can't fight and flee, all that energy is just pent up inside you. You feel like you're going to explode. Your boss starts to speak and you're thinking, here it comes. But you're shocked by what you hear and you can't believe you heard it right. What did you say, you ask your boss? We're considering you for a promotion. It takes a little time for us to simply get refocused to this new reality rather than the perceived one. So I really like this little story. This is from Dialogue for Peaceful Change, which is a modality that in my practice we're all trained in. There's an annual training at the Tatamagouche Center on Dialogue for Peaceful Change, and it's really trying to remind us that our systems have these very ancient ways of being that impact how we show up today. And one thing I always think about when I tell the story is in the ancient times, you would run from the saber-toothed tiger and sleep. But for us, we have kind of countless stressors throughout our day and we don't stop because we're on the clock. We don't have time to process or regulate, metabolize, and then we carry on and then go into the next meeting and the next conversation and the next meeting. So no wonder we're all struggling to navigate conflict. It lives in the body. As a conflict facilitator, people often have really clear ideas of what they think and feel about conflict, but it's about how to navigate the moment with someone who we're in tension with without spinning out or running or hiding or denying or avoiding or whatever the strategy might be. Conflict is physiological. We need to acknowledge this. We need to tend to our bodies before we're ever going to be in a place of readiness about it. So some of the things that I'll share with you are from restorative justice world. Basically, you've been hearing this strategy demands accountability, responsibility. How can you increase your capacity to embody anchor energy in your role as a social worker? So that's something you can reflect on going forward. Anchor energy meaning that you're regulated. You are practiced and skillful and constantly finding ways to build your internal physiological ability to stay regulated. So I often say that regulation is actually my job. Literally, I am hired to be an even keel presence, an anchor in the room. And I am not the facilitator I was last year in terms of my regulation. I'm going to be better next year. Each passing year, I'm better and better at identifying what parts of conversations are harder for my system. What are the things that tend to send me flying and take me out of a state of regulation? What are the fast hacks to keep myself grounded when things are heating up? How can I be skillful at naming and identifying the moment for a break? These are all things that I'm constantly kind of fostering. So I am very happy to share with you some of the restorative justice questions. So you can take a look at this later if you want to refer, but these are the questions that we ask when we're doing assessments. These are very foundational restorative justice questions that are useful, especially how has this impacted you? What would help you move forward? What can I do to support you? Impact is so often bypassed. Can we really focus on impact and live there for a while and really get to know the impact? And then how can you be accountable? So maybe it's like, hey, I'm so sorry the delay for our service was so egregious. We're doing our best, but we are understaffed and this is the truth. And I'm really sorry that it was hard or that you didn't get the thing you needed right away or that I didn't respond as soon as I could have. Can we just be honest? So when I send the slides, there's a hyperlink to this little kind of printout cheat sheet. So you can print it, you can just refer to it if you need it. And so how can you be a good listener? How can you use these questions in your work? Listening is solidarity. Listening is shared understanding. And it's also efficient effort. If we take time to listen and connect with people, and now that you're understanding that conflict is physiological, listening is actually one of the most effective ways to help us regulate, to help us get back into a state of connection and relationship when things are heating up. Someone I feel like touched on this concept earlier. This is a quote by the Honorable Murray Sinclair, who unfortunately went to the ancestor realm in the last year. It was a tremendous loss. If you don't know about Murray Sinclair, he was the coolest person of all time. He was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He said, our leaders need to show the way, but no matter how many deals and agreements they make, it's in our daily conversations and interactions that our success as a nation in forging a better place will ultimately be measured. It's what we say to and about each other in public and in private that we need to look at changing. So I just find the wisdom in this quote such a gift. It's such an amazing reminder. We are interconnected. Everything we do is leaving some type of ripple. So what type of ripple are we leaving day to day? Are we leaving folks feeling more connected? Are we leaving folks feeling more stressed and disconnected? So we don't have a lot of time to dive into a group question, but you can maybe think about the physiology of conflict. And I'll just share a couple more thoughts before I leave some time for questions. Thanks for your patience with my sharing. So some foundational practices that you can think of when you're doing your work. How can your policies, practices, and procedures center voice and choice? This is should be a separate point. Showing up in a posture of dignity and integrity. So having a good relationship to yourself. Listening and noticing who isn't being heard with curiosity. Informed consent practices. Boundary work. We had a lot of questions about boundaries. I'll speak to that in a second. Can you move at the speed of trust? Can you go slower if it's just not feeling like a connection or an honest way right now? Can you keep working all the time to cultivate embodiment and physiological regulation? Can you get skillful at appropriate information sharing? One thing I do a lot of work with leaders is to help leaders say, I'm sorry, I can't say more. Here's why I can't say more, but I'm aware I'm doing something. Often naming what you are working within can be really helpful, even if you're not sharing something confidential. Can you get skillful at restorative practices? So some things that we do are things like conflict mapping, scripting, capacity building, and facilitation. Again, this is a lifelong journey, you know. You can have all the great ideas in the world, but it's really about your bodily ability to show up and stay present and stay grounded. And then consent-based decision making as well. I'm really doing a lot of work these days around shifting organizations and change movements out of consensus mindset, which can be actually quite stifling. I mean, we love consensus when we find it, but can we actually work from consent rather than consensus, which I would consider kind of one step down in terms of that hierarchy of decision making styles, kind of only one step down from the gold standard of consensus. And then self and collective care. And just some call to action. Where can you slow down and listen more? What can patterns of friction and frustration in your work tell you about relational disconnects? How can your processes mitigate these frictions and frustrations? So I often, when I'm assessing organizations, I notice these patterns where there's these constant sources of conflict or frustration or whatever. What's the teaching under that? What's going on? What's the felt experience of the people you're serving with those moments? Who do you trust? How can you build stronger connections here? If you have allies and comrades in your workplace, you have a lot of value and kind of gold. Can you leverage that? Can you strengthen that? Can you foster that? And then look across the sectors. Do you see shared goals or points of unity that can be used to organize? So, you know, in the gender-based violence movement, there's been these really interesting ways that this is slowly but surely intersecting with restorative practice, way more than 5, 10 years ago, for example. And where can you formalize and expand relational strategies? And formalize. Can you build this into how you hold meetings? Can you build this into the way that you write your policies and practices? Can your processes have, um, you know, formalized moments for checking in, for debriefing, for collective care, for informal sharing? Can we share a meal? Can we share a joke? And then again, just that self-care. So reminding you to do what you can to stay well and be really gentle and lean into collective care modalities as well. So that's it for the slides. I know we're almost at time. There were some questions. I just want to say a few things too. Oh, and I just really would be remiss not to just display this one slide. There's one slide in the deck, as you can see here, about some other great resources. So just to quickly name, there's a conflict preparedness toolkit that we developed. And this basically helps you assess, does your organization have things in place to mitigate the inevitability of conflict? I recently participated, I edited and coordinated a Rainbow Rights Guide. So that's about queer legislative rights. Very important right now in a time of queer hatred. There's a recent guide about conversion therapy and the recent legislative ban, a guide about democratic engagement, and also Beyond the Binary, which is an employer-facing resource for how folks can be more gender inclusive. So some things to check out later if you're curious. And just some other quick thoughts about questions, and then I'll send it to Tyler. There was some really great thoughts, and you know, if I had more time, I would have answered every single thing. One of the questions was about boundaries. There was multiple references to, you know, professional boundary work. I think part of skillfulness about boundaries is, again, your own work in relation to boundaries. Can you be an example in your working world in terms of your colleagues, your leaders, of showing what boundaries can look like? So naming your boundaries and also honoring your boundaries. Can you steward and uphold those boundaries? And can you model that to the people you serve as well? I have so many clear memories of when people showed me boundaries. I remember in university, I had a prof who had a really staunch boundary, and it was really like surprising. And then as time passed, I recognized how much she had really taught me about how to uphold a line. So I think boundaries is really about how can we embody those and just keep articulating them over and over. Someone else said, how do you know what's not relational? If it's not relational, you'll know. It's always very painfully clear because there's conflict, there's disconnection, there's lack of communication, there's mistrust, paranoia, ineffective systems, processes that don't make a lot of sense, confusion. Anything that doesn't feel like it's going well and you don't feel at ease with the people around you, you're not in a relational way. And it's really that simple. So you know you're in a good relationship when you feel trust, you feel ease, you feel clarity and understanding. When you're not in a relational way, you are probably not feeling any of that connection. And then you're probably feeling confusion or frustration or whatever those emotions might be toward the work. The other question was there was a handful of kind of similar questions about folks who might not be aware of relational strategy or, how can you work with people who are maybe really angry or mistrustful of you in a relational way. The other thing I think that really is a deep foundational truth about it is, again, this honest way of relating. You just need to meet people where they're at, and you need to meet yourself where you are as well. So if you're just hearing about relational strategy today, you're not going to facilitate a circle tomorrow. That wouldn't be wise mind. But maybe you can have a tough conversation with your roommate that you might have been avoiding having, and maybe this is your little personal nudge to practice it. And same with folks who are very angry and mistrustful. Have that compassion, have that understanding, and just do what you can to be a gentle force, a gentle presence. One of my most beloved elders really taught me about this idea of walking gently through life. Can you be someone that doesn't leave a bad mark wherever you go, where you're softly making your way through the community and through the world? That's really my personal commitment as a facilitator and as someone who's just committed to relationships. So I know I'm pushing it. Tyler, I'll send it back to you now, and then I'll stick around if folks have specific questions they want to ask. I'm here for that.
You're pushing it in a relational way. But also, I just so value and appreciate the insights and wisdom you've shared, and scaling between like the sort of theoretical, what does it mean at that macro sense, but also like, what does it look like in person? And one of the things that really struck me is that, like, your interaction at a coffee shop can be relational. Um, Right? And relational doesn't mean being nice. It doesn't mean being kind. It means you're showing up in a way that centers the relationship and whatever the context is. You can't be relational in the same way to everyone either. And one of the lessons that I've learned is that sometimes being relational is providing very critical feedback.
Mhm.
So just really appreciate you doing this and really encourage folks. I keep saying the word really. I really encourage folks to go to your website, restorativeapproach.ca. There's also links in the chat here. Shila mentioned the Dialogue for Peaceful Change training at Tatum-Gush Center, also the Emergent Strategy book. I'm also a huge fan of Adrienne Lee Brown, who's taught me so much, not just from Emergent Strategy, but Loving Corrections. I have a copy of that here.
Yeah.
And all the other work from the Emergent Strategy, a series of book around transformative justice as well. Great resources there, definitely grounded in a sort of Afrocentric feminist perspective out of the States. But yeah, thank you so much, Shila. I am going to share my screen and encourage folks to ask questions in the chat. If we don't have time for them today, what I can commit to doing is using those questions to guide further PD or follow-up information. Oh, I have so many screens open right now, bear with me. There we are. I'm going to post the evaluation link in the survey, evaluation survey link, pardon me, in the chat, but also these questions. I'm curious in the chat if you have time. What are you taking away from today's session? What are you still curious about? And is there anything else you'd like to share as we wrap up our time together today? And I'm going to share a few other things with you folks before we wrap up. Also, I want to let people know that this is being recorded, so it will be available on YouTube in a few weeks as well. So feel free to go back and revisit this content. And some upcoming events. So on June 25th, we have our Communities in Practice. That's an informal PD session where you can meet other social workers and talk about all kinds of things. As mentioned earlier, on July 2nd, we have our Lunch Learn on Indigenous Ethics with Veronica Bernard. July 31st, we have a session on the power of mentorship. August 13th, we have a session on But What Do I Say around social work and eating disorders. And on August 18th, we have a session with Amy Pinnell, Understanding Social Work Burnout and How to Prevent It. We have lots more coming up over the next few months as well. So stay engaged on our Eventbrite, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and our newsletter. Shila, I don't see any questions in the chat,
Yeah,
which
I'll
is totally
stick on for
understandable.
a minute. And, just to name to the room, like, feel free to connect with me. If you have a specific question, don't hesitate to send an email. My slides will have my contact info, and Tyler has generously shared that as well. I'm really, as you can tell, very dedicated to this work and I love it. So if you want to talk about it, if you're thinking about things, if your group needs PD or if you're in a conflict and need some support, I'm here for it. I love this work. And I really, really appreciate having this space. And I look forward to your feedback as well. I'm always learning and polishing in my work. So if you have any thoughts or feedback for me, I welcome that as well.
Sweet. Hope folks enjoy the rest of your day. It's a gorgeous Sunday, or gorgeous sunny day here in Chipuktuk. Hopefully the restaurant in Mi'kmaq is also gorgeous. We deserve sunny weather after all the rain we've been getting. So hopefully you're having a good day. Let's see some hearts. It's one of the things with webinars, there's not a lot of direct engagement. So you're like, thank goodness for the reactions. And shout out to Shila's beautiful puppy in the background.
Little Susie hanging out for
Susie.
watching today.
Jody says in the chat, thank you for being present with us today. May you all be well. Goodbye. There's a quote here from Carol, a comment from Carol as well. I found myself reflecting on my 30 years of practice in social work and parenting. I realized that the only time I felt comfortable was when my work was relational. Wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, it feels good to be relational. Our bodies respond so well. It's who we're meant to be.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on this a little bit in your presentation as well, but there's always a risk with relationality as well, as that sometimes we have access to the language, but not the principles and the practices. And definitely see people using the term, but not embodying those practices. So really appreciate you highlighting what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of that earlier point where I'm like more attuned to the fact that we're inviting folks into these relational strategies and they might not even know. So it sounds really nice, but if you don't have a felt sense of community, if you don't have trusting relationships and intimacy, and then what must it be like to be invited in? So I'm really thinking about that experiential gap. And I really appreciate that flag, Tyler, where yeah, the language is like astronomically more available to us, and I'm really not seeing the shifts needed in the practice of it.
Yeah. Well, folks, I'll stop recording and encourage you folks to engage with the YouTube recording that's available later.